Hey there. Let me ask you something. What do you think haunts a person more? Words they never got to say, or the silence they never saw coming? It's not the fight, not the tears, not the dramatic exit. It's the moment they realize you're just gone. No explanation, no closure, no more chasing, just quiet. They thought you'd always be there. They thought you'd argue, beg, plead like you always did. They thought your love was a guarantee, something they could leave and come back to whenever it suited them. But what they never expected was your silence, because silence is the one thing they can't control. It doesn't give them a target. It doesn't feed their ego. It gives them nothing. And in that nothingness, they're left alone with the one thing they fear most, their own reflection. They expected rage. They expected long texts, teary voicemails, maybe even a desperate final message. But when you go silent, you rob them of their favorite role, the victim. Your silence says, I owe you nothing, and that truth burns deeper than any insult ever could. Marcus Aurelius once said, silence is a lesson learned through life's many sufferings, and that's what this is, a lesson. Not for you, but for them. In this video, we're going to break down why your silence is hurting them more than you think, the hidden stages they're going through behind closed doors, and how to hold your silence in a way that doesn't just rewire their mind, but rebuilds your own self-worth in the process. Let's begin. Part 1. Why silence hurts more than words. Let's get one thing straight. Silence hurts, but not in the way most people think. It's not loud. It doesn't come with screaming matches or broken plates. It doesn't announce itself with drama or closure. Silence is the one pain that lingers quietly, because it removes emotional control, and for someone whose power came from manipulating your emotions, that's terrifying. In the beginning, they convince themselves you're just playing hard to get. They tell themselves, oh, he's just being dramatic. She'll come around. Give it a few days. Their ego needs that story. Because as long as they believe you're still thinking about them, they don't have to feel the consequences of their actions. But time has a way of exposing everything. When a few days stretch into weeks, when they check their phone and still see nothing, no call, no text, no I miss you. That's when the silence begins to eat at them. Because now it's no longer a game. Now the thought creeps in. What if they're really done? What if they've moved on? What if I didn't matter as much as I thought I did? You see, humans hate the unknown. We crave answers, even painful ones. And when there are no answers, the mind starts writing its own stories, and those stories are often worse than reality. Your silence becomes the canvas, and they paint it with every doubt, every insecurity, every fear they never wanted to face. They expected you to break first, to crack under the pressure, to send one last emotional message just so they could feel powerful again. But you didn't. And that is what makes your silence so destructive. Because in that quiet, they don't just question what's happening now, they question the entire relationship. They replay every moment wondering, did they ever really need me? Were they just choosing me? Was I ever that important? And here's the kicker. They're doing this to themselves. You haven't said a word. You haven't defended yourself. You haven't begged, chased, or explained. But somehow, they're spiraling. Why? Because silence isn't passive, it's strategic. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It simply withdraws. And that withdrawal starves their ego, denies them the one thing they thought they'd always get from you: validation. Words can be twisted. They can be debated, ignored, misread. But silence. Silence sits in the room with them, whispering, you're not in control anymore. That's why silence hurts more than words, because it flips the entire dynamic. They thought they were the one with the power. Now, they're not even sure they were ever needed. And that kind of doubt, That's the slowest, deepest, most powerful wound of all. Part 2. The hidden stages they go through. Now let's talk about something most people never see. What really happens in their mind after you go silent. Because silence doesn't hit all at once. It doesn't knock them over like a tidal wave. It creeps in stage by stage, breaking them down in ways they'll never admit. Not even to themselves. Let's break it down. Stage 1, relief. At first, they actually feel good about the silence. They tell themselves, "See, I knew they'd back off. I just needed space." They think it's a game. They think you're just trying to make them miss you and their ego. It eats that up. To them, silence means control. It confirms that you're still orbiting around them. They get comfortable, too comfortable. Stage 2, curiosity. A few days pass, maybe a week, and that expected text never arrives. That sad Instagram story nowhere to be found. That breakup quote still missing. That's when they start scrolling. They rewatch your stories. They check your profile 3, 4, 5 times a day. They're not liking anything, but they're watching everything. They're looking for proof that you're still hurting, still hoping, still holding on. But all they see is nothing, and that nothing starts to echo. Stage 3, frustration. Now they start trying to poke the bear. They like an old post. Upload a story with someone else. Maybe something subtle just enough to catch your attention. They want a reaction, any reaction. Because if you respond even negatively, it means they still matter. But when you don't, it drives them mad. They're confused, agitated, off balance. For the first time, they realize they're no longer in control. Stage 4, fear. This is where panic sets in. What if they're really done? What if someone else is in the picture? What if I wasn't as important as I thought I was? Silence creates space, and that space becomes a mirror. They're not seeing you anymore. They're seeing themselves and everything they didn't want to face. You're not posting heartbreak, so maybe you're not heartbroken. Maybe you're healing. Maybe you're glowing up. Maybe they were replaceable. Stage 5, regret. This is when it hits hardest. They start replaying everything. The late-night talks, the times you forgave them when you shouldn't have, the way you showed up even when they didn't ask you to. Every moment they took for granted now feels like a punch in the chest. They realize you're not silent because you're playing games. You're silent because you're done. And that realization is louder than anything you could ever say. Epictetus once said, "If you wish to be strong, learn to enjoy being misunderstood." And that's exactly what your silence is doing. Let them misunderstand it. Let them guess, while you quietly rebuild, grow, and evolve into the version of yourself they never thought you'd become without them, because the truth is, they were never ready to lose you. But they did, the moment they underestimated the power of your silence. Part 3. How silence reprograms their mind. Here's the part they never saw coming. Your silence doesn't just hurt them. It reprograms their entire perception of you. You see people build stories in their minds. They convince themselves who you are, how much you need them, how far you're willing to go to keep them. It makes them feel safe, in control. They assumed you'd always be there, that no matter what they said, what they did, you'd come back, you'd fold, you'd chase. But silence. Silence shatters that story. The longer you say nothing, the more their mind starts rewriting the narrative. And that's when it hits them. Maybe I misjudged who they really were. At first, they saw you as weak, emotional, easy to manipulate. But every day that goes by without a message, without a post, without a reaction, they start to realize you weren't weak. You were just choosing them. And now you're choosing yourself. That shift. It's brutal for them, because suddenly, they're not the center of your world. They're not the prize. They're wondering, was I just a chapter? Not the main story, just a footnote. Your silence becomes a mirror. And what they see in that reflection isn't flattering. They see their arrogance. They see what they took for granted. They see how replaceable they actually were. And here's what truly messes with them. They'll never get the answers. You're not explaining. You're not justifying. You're not giving them closure. And that lack of control, it consumes them. Because the human mind, it hates unanswered questions. Did they ever really love me? Was I just an option? Were they stronger than I thought? The whole time, these aren't questions you need to answer. That's the power of silence. It forces them to think, to doubt, to face truths they never wanted to admit. Seneca once said, "The greatest revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." You're not retaliating. You're not playing games. You're rising, quietly, deliberately. You're becoming the version of yourself they never expected you'd become, the version who doesn't need their approval, doesn't seek their validation, doesn't care for their return. Because now you remember who you were before they made you forget. Every time they replay old messages, every time they scroll through your photos, they're not just reminiscing, they're reprogramming the way they see you. You're no longer the one who begged, you're the one who vanished. Not to disappear, but to evolve. And by the time they finally reach out, they'll be reaching for someone who doesn't even exist anymore. Because the version of you they knew is gone. Part 4. The mirror effect. What they see when you disappear. There's something powerful that happens when you go silent, and most people never talk about it, because when you stop reacting, you stop being their mirror. Let that sink in. So much of how people see themselves comes from what we reflect back to them. Your energy, your presence, your care, your forgiveness. You were their mirror. You made them feel like they were worthy even when they weren't acting like it. You made excuses for their behavior. You gave their chaos meaning. You tried to make sense of what didn't make sense. But when you disappear, when you go silent, that mirror shatters. Now they're forced to look at themselves unfiltered, unmasked. And most people, they can't handle their own reflection. Your silence doesn't just remove your voice. It removes the emotional shelter they were hiding behind. No more validation, no more comfort, no more ego boost. Suddenly it's just them, and the truth. And that's where the real regret begins. Because deep down, it's not just that they miss you. It's that they used you. Maybe not consciously, but emotionally, absolutely. They depended on you to feel like a decent person. Your forgiveness made them feel lovable. Your attention made them feel worthy. Your emotional reactions gave them identity. Now, without all that, they're left with the one person they can't run from themselves. That's when the guilt creeps in. Not the surface-level kind, not the fake apologies. I'm talking about deep soul-level guilt, the kind that keeps them up at night, the kind they can't outrun with distractions or new people. Because now, there's nothing left to distract them. They're not suffering because you punished them. They're suffering because you're no longer there to protect them from who they really are. Seneca once said he suffers more than necessary who suffers before it is necessary. And now, they're suffering. Not because you're loud, but because you're gone. Not because you lashed out, but because you walked away without a word. Here's the truth they never expected to face. You were the piece they didn't know how to keep. You were the mirror they shattered, and now they're left staring at the broken pieces of themselves. Part 5. How to keep your silence powerful. Let's be real. Anyone can go silent for a day, maybe 2. But the real test is staying silent. When your heart is screaming for closure, when your ego wants to prove a point, when your mind begs to be heard one last time. That's when most people fold. That's when the silence breaks. And just like that, the power's gone. Because when you speak just to make a point, you hand your power right back to the person who made you feel powerless. But real silence. It's not about punishment. It's about discipline, about choosing peace over chaos, about transforming in the shadows. The most powerful silence doesn't say I'm mad or I'm done. It says I'm becoming. While they're checking your stories, refreshing your page, hoping for signs that you're broken, You're rebuilding. You're at the gym. You're journaling. You're healing. You're reconnecting with the version of you that they made you forget. Every time you resist the urge to reach out, you're proving something important. You're not seeking validation. You're not explaining yourself. You're not trying to be understood. You're choosing self-respect over emotional reaction. And here's the part they never saw coming. You're not blocking them. You're not unfollowing them. You're not deleting old photos. No, you're letting them watch, from a distance, as you evolve, quietly, without them. Because the real pain doesn't come from your silence. It comes from watching your glow up, knowing they're no longer a part of it. And yes, there will be moments your emotions rise up. You'll crave closure. You'll want to explain your side. You'll want to prove that you cared. But justice, it doesn't always come wrapped in revenge. Sometimes justice looks like peace. Zeno of Citium once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more than we speak." So in your silence, you're not ignoring. You're listening to your instincts, to your truth, to the part of you that finally says no more. Silence is only powerful if it's used to grow. Don't waste your silence trying to make them miss you. Use it to make yourself whole, not so they notice, but so that you remember what power feels like when it comes from within. Because the goal was never to get them back. The goal is to become someone who would never tolerate being broken like that again. Part 6. Silence is self-respect in action. Let's set the record straight. Silence isn't revenge. It's not manipulation. It's not some tactic to make them miss you. Silence is self-respect in action. Because every time you choose not to react, not to explain, not to chase, you're choosing dignity over desperation. And that's something most people can't understand. We live in a world that teaches us to prove ourselves, to fight for closure, to explain why we deserved better. But here's the truth. You don't need to prove your worth to someone who was never willing to see it. Reacting says, "Please understand me, please see my side, please care," but silence. Silence says, "I already know who I am," and that message isn't just for them. It's for you. You're telling yourself, "I no longer beg for space where I was barely tolerated. I no longer shrink myself to be accepted. I no longer raise my voice just to be heard." Your silence becomes your boundary, a spiritual one that guards your peace, your healing, your rebirth. Because real self-respect doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It doesn't demand closure. It simply walks away quietly, completely, and never looks back. Yes, it's tempting. Tempting to send one last message. Tempting to clear the air. Tempting to say, "Look what you lost." But the moment you do that, you make them the center again. You give away your clarity for their comfort. Here's a truth I've learned the hard way. You don't owe closure to people who knew what they were doing when they hurt you. You don't owe explanations to people who were never listening. Epictetus said, "Don't explain yourself. Your friends don't need it, and your enemies won't believe it." Let that sink in. Because in your silence, you're not ignoring them. You're honoring yourself. You're protecting the version of you that's learning how to breathe again, how to love again, how to trust yourself after being gaslit, overlooked, or drained. Your silence. That's where your healing begins. And if they're uncomfortable in that silence, let them be. Because the version of you that used to beg for answers no longer exists. Now, you're not just someone who knows their worth. You're someone who finally chooses to act like it. So next time you wonder if silence makes you weak, remember this. Silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Part 7. When will they break? Let's be honest, you've asked yourself this. When will they feel it? When will the silence hit them? When will they realize what they lost? And here's the truth, they don't break from the silence itself. They break from what that silence means. At first, they think it's temporary. They assume you're just trying to make a point. They expect a message, a reaction, a comeback. They still think you're out there, waiting, still emotionally hooked, still orbiting around them. But time tells the truth. When days become weeks, when weeks stretch into months, and still nothing, that's when it starts to crack them. That's when they start scrolling through old photos, rereading old texts, listening to old voice notes, looking for the old you, the one who would have dropped everything to reply at 2 a.m., to forgive, to fix things. But you're not there anymore. And that's what breaks them. Not the silence, but the realization that the person they once took for granted no longer exists. You didn't go quiet to play games. You went quiet to find peace. And when they finally reach out with that, "Hey, stranger," that half-hearted apology, that breadcrumb of regret, they're not reaching the same version of you. They're reaching a version that's already gone. That's not revenge. That's evolution. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. You're not bitter. You're not cold. You're just gone." And they never expected that. Some people break in weeks, some in months. But when it hits them, it won't be dramatic. There won't be tears on camera. No grand confession. It'll happen quietly, at night, alone, scrolling, replaying memories they once dismissed. And that's when they finally realize they didn't just lose you. They lost the only version of you who ever would have stayed. So if you're wondering, will they ever get it? Yes. They will. But by the time they do, you'll be unreachable. Not because you're punishing them, but because you finally chose to heal you. So if you've made it this far, let this sink in. Your silence was never weakness. It was strength. It was clarity. It was the moment you stopped proving your worth to someone who couldn't see it and started proving it to yourself. Because silence isn't about walking away from them. It's about walking back to you. It's the space where peace begins, where healing becomes possible, where the real glow-up starts. So if you've ever questioned, does my silence even matter? Let me tell you now, it means everything. They may never admit it. They may never say the words you hoped to hear. But your absence, it spoke louder than any apology ever could. And as you rise day by day, step by step, you're becoming someone who doesn't just know their worth, but someone who finally acts like it. Right now, if this message hit home, I want you to drop this in the comments. My silence is my power, or I'm choosing silence because I'm choosing myself. Say it. Own it. Because this version of you, the calm, the grounded, the unbothered, he's here to stay. And if you're ready to keep evolving, if you're ready to turn silence into power and pain into purpose, hit that subscribe button. This is just the beginning of your strongest chapter yet, and you don't have to walk it alone.